this question from Trey on email to kick off. Why were Ajax forced to abandon their match against Groningen, and what punishment would be fair to give them, Andy?
Well, so what happened is Ajax playing Groningen last Sunday. The game was stopped after 6 minutes because the F-side ultras behind the goal, the most noticeable fan group, were doing a pyro tribute to a recently deceased member of their group. But there was a lot of pyro, so that they were told to wind it in, basically.
And these are the Ajax ultras?
Yes. And so the game was stopped by the referee, resumed, and as is the case with anything under the crowd trouble banner in the Eredivisie, once it happens for a second time, the referee takes the fans off and it's a definitive stoppage because they came back with even more pyro. So if you might have seen the images on YouTube or perhaps a photo, is this extraordinary sight of where the F-side ultras are, what looks like the whole stand in bright red pyro, and you can see the sign on the big screen that says fireworks are forbidden on the top of it. So it's quite an interesting juxtaposition. But the sheer level of it was obviously at the point where it was a safety hazard, and you know there were a lot of, say, children in the stadium who looked a bit frightened, and you know you just can't continue the match under those conditions, even before we get to the bit about what the Eredivisie does in terms of match stoppages and what the protocol is, which we're already aware of.
Because we would have been used to seeing pyros in some of those European games, even though fireworks are banned, etc.
But
are you saying the level?
The level, yeah. And for Ajax, it feels like it's come at the worst possible time because, of course, they've had a load of problems on and off the pitch this season. And so Ajax released quite a pugnacious statement saying that they were scandalised by this outrageous behaviour. They'll be looking for the perpetrators. And this is something that clubs aren't often inclined to do, like go after, I guess, their most faithful fans, really. Whatever you think of ultra movements globally or from any particular club, you know, these are people who give their life to the club. And it sort of goes back to what we were saying in Thursday's show, really, about Nice. You know, it's always a tricky balance for a club to stamp down on unacceptable behaviour, and at the same time, they've always got an eye on alienating some of their most faithful fans. So, I mean, in this situation, it's obviously going to cost Ajax a lot of money straight off because they've got to refund everyone who went to the game. They rescheduled it for Tuesday afternoon without any fans in attendance. So they've lost well over 1 million in gate receipts, probably somewhere approaching 2 million in gate receipts, which is a huge problem for them. And they're probably looking at some sort of at least partial stadium ban off the back of this, because it's not the first time it's happened in recent years. There was that game against Feyenoord where that was called off and had to be completed again, like on a Tuesday afternoon. So this is far from ideal with Ajax, and it's just another problem for a club that's got an absolute host of them.
To jump in and riff on what Andy was just saying then, I'm curious to get Andy's view on this. For me, I personally feel like Ajax is a club that has lost its way now for a number of years. Yeah. I think it's natural that it would have happened when essentially the heart was ripped out of the team and all of those Ajax players left after the great era under Ten Hag, and many of them followed him to United. But it feels like Ajax accelerated what they've always been known for, which is selling their best and brightest young talents when they've been ready to fly the nest. Some of those players were sold maybe prematurely, but it feels like Ajax have been at a crossroads for a while, and you look at some of the things that they've been trying recently. There was speculation that they were trying to bring, very controversially, trying to bring Mark Overmars back to the club, and it just strikes me as a club that recognises it needs to return to its DNA, and it can only really do that with people who understand the DNA, some people who've been within the club before. And I just wonder if you feel that there is maybe a sense of desperation now surrounding Ajax in being unable to maybe turn to sort of the best qualified person to sort of reconstruct that in somebody like Overmars, because there's obviously very well publicized reasons for them to not bring him back to the club. I know that officially I think he rejected the possibility to return, but it just feels like Ajax really need a steady hand from somebody who knows the club best inside and out and can also reshape the club in a sporting sense. And until they do that, they're going to remain a club that, you know, just seems to be in the wilderness a little bit, really, for somebody who is a domestic giant.
Yeah, I mean, for what it's worth, great job as he did there. They could not bring Mark Overmars back. They just absolutely could not. He was fired for a reason of beyond unacceptable behaviour towards female employees. And I think one of the most disappointing things, actually, was Erik ten Hag, who, of course, was invited to come back and take the job again as head coach, said no, because I think he realised how much upstairs, how much Overmars and Van der Sar were part of his success. And, you know, he stuck up for Mark Overmars, which I thought was really disappointing. And if I was an Ajax fan, that would totally put me off Ten Hag getting the job again in future, because, you know, there have to be lines of acceptable behaviour, you know, however competent you are. So clearly, I think there needs to be an acceptance. This is a transitional season. At the moment, they've got a sporting director who knows he's going to replace and wants to be replaced in Alex Kroos. And obviously, the history of Ajax and the fact that they lean into tradition and heritage does always edge towards saying, "Oh, we have to have someone with the club's DNA." And maybe that goes against choosing the right person for the job sometimes. You know, maybe there needs to be an understanding that there is no quick fix for Ajax. And in a way, Francesco Farioli was that last season for them, because, you know, he made up a nearly 30-point gap on PSV. And it's why, even though the football wasn't traditional Ajax, and in fact, it was not great to watch at all, if we were being perfectly honest, but it was practical. And do you know what? I think the fans generally understand the practicalities of it much better than they're given credit for. So for all this political grandstanding of presidents and sporting directors that, you know, this club has got history and tradition and saying what they think the fans want to hear, actually the fans really got it with Farioli. They're like, okay, this guy isn't playing Ajax football, but he's not got a great squad. He's dealing with the reality rather than a utopia. And I think that's what they have to do now. You know, whoever's next, and you know, Farioli's not going to come back. But I think in terms of a sporting director and in terms of a coach going forward, they need people who will deal with not what they want Ajax to be in an ideal world, but what they can be. And I think Farioli showed what you could do on a practical level. I mean, really, I suppose it's a Dutch Manchester United in that sense. For so long, there's all this discussion around Manchester United of what a Manchester United side should be and, you know, what direction Manchester United should be moving in as a club. And, you know, I think even you had it recently, Jason Wilcox going, this is our plan to qualify consistently for the Champions League and then win Premier League titles. And it's like, whoa. You know, one step at a time. You know, I think the past can sometimes be a real millstone when it stops you from making small practical steps towards respectability and competitiveness. And that's what Ajax need to do.
Yeah, this question from create_skate on Instagram has got Jonathan Johnson written all over it, JJ. With Lens topping Ligue 1, is the league more exciting than ever? as someone who used to watch from the outside, it felt as if PSG had total dominance. But has that changed for good?
I hope that we are about to witness a new era of competitiveness in Ligue 1, but also I would dispute that Ligue 1 hasn't been that competitive over the last couple of years. I feel that argument is always a little overused. I think when you look back, certainly since 2012, you've had the likes of Montpellier, Monaco, Lille have all managed to win Ligue 1. So there is more variety, I think, than Ligue 1 is given credit for. But I think it's fantastic, very, very exciting to see Lens flying so high at the moment. They had a great couple of years a while back under Francaise when they managed to get themselves into the Champions League, managed to finish second and run PSG much closer than many people thought they would. And, I think Lens are one of those clubs. When Lens are doing well, Ligue 1 is a better place for it. It's extremely exciting. They're not just cult favourites. They have a phenomenal home atmosphere. They're a real important staple club to Ligue 1 and French football's identity, not just domestically, but also on the continent as well. And I feel that although Marseille are probably the more reliable of the current teams, sort of swimming in and around PSG, who could potentially rival them for the title overall, I do think that Lens are an exciting addition to that mix. I think what they've been doing so far under Pierre Sage has been fantastic to watch unfold. I think looking at the redemption story of Florian Thauvein's return to France with Ligue 1, with Lens, and his attempts to play his way back into contention for France's World Cup squad in 2026 has been one of the more intriguing subplots of the season so far. And it's great that there are clubs who are well positioned to potentially capitalise when PSG do have their slip-ups. Another tricky game coming up for PSG this weekend against Stade Rennais at home. And I think that, Lens do have the potential to be, perhaps the team of the first half of the season so far. Like I said, Marseille do still have the ability to have their say as well and are pretty well placed to keep the pressure up on PSG. But it does feel like right now having a handful of clubs as opposed to just one who keep that pressure on PSG, it's definitely a good thing for Ligue 1. And I think the other thing as well is there's so many other teams that we expected to be doing better who have tripped PSG up, like Monaco, for example, but find themselves way down the standings. You look at some other clubs as well, like Lille, who have dropped some unexpected points, who could be a bit higher up in the standings. And I think that there is potential, should PSG maybe go on a run, a bit of a barren streak where they drop a few more points domestically, where there are a couple of other clubs that could perhaps close the gap and make it even more exciting for the neutral as we head into 2026.
Yeah, I mean, it does feel sometimes, JJ, as if Ligue 1 is a bit singled out in this sense because of the incredible financial power of PSG compared to other teams. But, realistically, what's happened with PSG winning the league consistently? It's not dissimilar to the Bundesliga. It's not dissimilar to Serie A in the Juventus years under Conte and Allegri before we got to the point where their dominance slipped because of their financial mismanagement. This isn't a Ligue 1 thing. This is something that's happening in European football, as Miguel Delaney would tell us if he was here. But when we talk about the finances, JJ, what I wanted to ask you is there a window towards, and I think Lens are a good example of this, towards Ligue 1 becoming more competitive because of what's happened with the TV money? Because I think you look at Lens, they're a really good example of what you can do with being inventive and, because there's not money, using strategy. Now, Sage is a great coach. He's a genuinely great coach. But you look at the players that Lens have lost over the last couple of years, and it's something that held them back under Will Still last season. They should not be able to do this. But a lot of credit has got to go to Jean-Louis Leca, who used to keep goal for them. He's a very inexperienced sporting director who has done a lot of good deals behind the scenes to give Sage the raw materials to have at it. One of those being bringing Thauvin on board, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, the entire hierarchy at Lens deserves great praise, because I think it takes a certain type of leadership to recognise that a club has overspent, has gone beyond its limits. And that's the situation that Lens had when they qualified for the Champions League. They realised that they went over budget. They paid money, not just in terms of the transfer fees, but in terms of the wages that were distributed amongst the squad as well, where they were living beyond their means, and they realised that they needed to rein that in as quickly as possible. So like you said, there's a handful of really big name players who ended up leaving. Brice Samba, for example, who's gone to Rennes, linked up with one of their former heroes as well in Seko Fofana, the midfielder, as well as the general director, Arnaud Puy. So it's, I think Lens deserve massive praise for recognising the financial limitations that they live within, and also being able to bring themselves back to operating on a budget that's more within their means, and also more aligned with the current landscape of French football, certainly in financial terms, because like you mentioned, no club, even PSG, is immune to the deterioration of the TV rights money at this moment in time. But there are some clubs that are handling that transitional period, that sort of the wilderness years, I guess, that we could call it in economic terms, that Ligue 1 and French football is going through at professional level right now. And Lens are one of the teams that are traversing that better than us. And I think Pierre Sage's pragmatism plays an absolutely key role, but also having people like Lecca, who you mentioned, in those key positions, making those important decisions, but also having an understanding what it's like, not just being on the pitch and sort of, being able to experience that fervour that the Stade Bollaert creates, but also having been a part of the team up until quite recently, because Lecca's official retirement, I think, only dates back a couple of years maximum. So for him to have made that transition so quickly, I think his memories, his feeling for that dressing room, was still very much intact, and that has been a huge help for Pierre Sage when bringing in some of these players and being able to ensure that they'll fit in.
This question's with an eye to next month's January transfer window. Anthony on Blue Sky asked, with AC Milan making inquiries into Jean-Philippe Mateta, how exactly would he fit into Max Allegri's squad?
The second half of that sentence is quite, that escalated quickly, isn't it? To quote Will Ferrell. I mean, at the beginning, you think making inquiries into Jean-Philippe Mateta, does he fancy some free tickets? Could I have an autograph? They've got no chance of signing him. I mean, it's pretty clear. You're talking about a guy who is now a consistent, proven Premier League goal scorer and a French international, and someone who, people were saying when he first got called up, he's got no chance of making the final squad for the World Cup. He has got a chance of making the squad for the World Cup, and not just as their Olivier Giroud. He can do stuff that no other striker they've got can do. That versatility, I think, is and that difference is a plus for him. But I think as well, he at the beginning you thought, well, he's on a good run, but now it's amazing what he's been able to do and what he's able to do on a regular basis. He's proving himself in Europe as well, in European competition. Now Palace are in that. Look, Milan need a striker this winter. There's no doubt about that. And they're going to have to do some horse trading for it to happen. I've said for a while that I think the deal that they were trying to structure with Roma, the sort of loan swap, very much like the one that happened with Tammy Abraham and Alexis Salamakers last summer in summer 2024. The deal with which would have had Artem Dovbyk going to Milan and Santi Jimenez going to Roma. I could see that reviving because there are not enormous resources on either side. If there's one thing that suggests that maybe a deal could happen, I guess it's Mateta's age. But apart from that, I mean, they'd have to break the bank to get him out of Palace, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It certainly seems that way at the moment, especially on the form that he's on. But I actually wanted to turn it around and ask you the question, Andy. How much of a role do you think Mateta's involvement in the Olympics with France a while back now has played in this renaissance and him ultimately realising his potential? Because I was reading something recently about how Mateta was essentially laughed at by his Palace teammates when he stated that his ambition at Palace was to try and get himself into the French national team. It seems really harsh that his Palace teammates would sort of be laughing at him for that. But also, I guess it's one of the ultimate sort of motivating factors as well in this story, that he's been able to prove not just to his teammates but to himself that ultimately having that goal, wasn't pie in the sky, and he has been able to help carry or lift this Palace side to new heights. And I just wondered if you felt, because I feel that certainly the involvement in the Olympics was maybe the moment that Mateta realised, I've actually got a realistic shot at doing this. I wonder if you feel that has played a key role in him developing himself towards this ultimately much bigger goal that he had in his career.
Let's not forget that he was being laughed at a time when he wasn't getting a starting position in the Crystal Palace side. You can understand.
Yeah, that's right. Now, Wilfried Zaha, who was alleged to be the player who did that, has hotly disputed that version of events, and I believe they've had a discussion, Zaha and Mateta, since then. But we have to bear in mind that he arrived as Palace essentially as squad filler, having lost his way a bit, and he showed a lot of early promise at Lyon earlier in his career, and it never quite really happened for him. So I think it's remarkable what he's managed to do. But I think if you're talking about in terms of self-esteem, JJ, no doubt the France Olympic experience was part of it. And that was the beautiful thing about France in the Olympics. The players who were there really wanted to be there. They wanted to seize the opportunity to put on the blue shirt. And he was principal amongst those. I think if you look at the effect, whatever you think of Thierry Henry as a coach, the strikers who work with him, it's almost like it's like a quasi-religious experience. And you remember when Roberto Martinez got the Belgium job, it was almost as if Thierry Henry, as his assistant, was to take the edge off the fact that a lot of players in that squad were slightly underwhelmed by the Martinez appointment. They're like, oh yeah, we did get to work with Thierry Henry. And you think of the likes of Romelu Lukaku, for example, absolutely eating out of his hand. They loved working with him. And I sense there's probably a little bit of the same with Mateta. We talked about, you talked about, JJ, other people putting limits on what he could possibly do. Working with Thierry Henry for centre forwards is the opposite. He's opening your eyes to what is possible, actually.
A great question. And I think we will return to that theme at some point or other in Ask OTC or on the main show. Anyway, this question from Shahid on X. What's the story behind Strasbourg banning Emmanuel Emegha from playing against Toulouse? Ultimately, are Strasbourg cutting their nose off to spite their face, JJ?
Yeah, so this is a fascinating development in recent weeks. So I think everybody realises Emmanuel Emegha, while playing for Strasbourg, which is the second Bluecoat-owned club alongside Chelsea, it was announced a couple of months ago, very early in the season, that Emegha is joining Chelsea, and that was not taken particularly well by the Strasbourg fans, particularly the fact that he was pictured holding the Chelsea shirt while still being a Strasbourg player. Now, he is the captain when fit and on the pitch, and he was essentially punished by the club for not following the club line in media appearances. There'd been some suggestion from him, albeit jokingly, that Strasbourg struggle without him when he doesn't play, and struggled in some of the bigger games because he wasn't available or wasn't on the pitch. But he also made a huge error of saying that upon joining Strasbourg, he mistakenly thought that it was in Germany and not France. Although the cultural feeling when you're in and around Strasbourg and the Alsace region might feel extremely Germanic, obviously, geographically that's completely, false that Strasbourg is in Germany. So I think that was extremely poorly received within the club. This is not going to go any further than just one game and done, but it is the latest chapter in an uneasy relationship between the player and the fans since announcing that move. He's still been performing extremely well on the pitch, we should say, despite the fact that Strasbourg collectively have been a little below par of late and have suffered some disappointing results, notably losing 2-1 to Brest over the weekend. But the player has admitted his error and has suggested that this will now be case closed and he'll be more considerate in the future.
So clearly he said a couple of daft things here and that they had to do something about it. But it feels to me a little bit, JJ, as if Emegha's been thrown under the bus by the club a little bit here. Because, of course, when he was initially, there was that banner calling him a pawn of Bluco immediately after his move, and he was quite hurt by that. And Rosignol, who's quite close to him, stood up for him after that. But really, they appointed him captain knowing he was going to Chelsea a little bit afterwards. And they obviously sanctioned him going to Stamford Bridge and posing with a shirt, which... transfers ahead of time happen all the time in the Bundesliga, which I realise Strasbourg is not in Germany, by the way, just to clarify. I realise it is in France. But for comparison, we know that players are going to move to another club in 6 months' time, just like people change jobs and sort out a notice period. Let's all be adults about it. It's part of life. But the way that they haven't controlled the narrative around Emegha has left him to receive all the flack. And at the end of the day, he's only 22. He's barely a full international. They should have protected him better, especially as going to Chelsea is essentially staying in-house.
I don't disagree with that at all. I think he probably made himself an easy fall guy with some of those comments. But also I think it's very easy to offer him up as a little bit of a sacrificial lamb in order to illustrate to the fan base that values are being upheld and that the institution is stronger than has been made out to be in the past, when Emegha already has what he's wanted from this situation, which is that he knows he's going to be joining Chelsea and he's going to be playing Premier League football and presumably European football of some sort next season. And ultimately, it seems to be something that's being motivated by trying to appease as opposed to control the narrative, to Andy's point. But I do agree that overall, since Bluco acquired Strasbourg, I feel that communication hasn't been clear enough. Outward communication, external communication, not just with the fans, but sort of how Bluco and how Strasbourg essentially exist within the Bluco umbrella. I think that has left a lot to be desired over its first couple of years. Clearly, it's starting to be taken more seriously, and there is more of a concerted effort now to be very attentive to expectations, certainly within the fan base. But I think a lot of the damage had already been done, hence some of these kind of irate protests from the Strasbourg fans and their boycotting of early portions of games from some of the ultras as well. Not as violent as the situation in Nice, but equally another disgruntled fan base, which has created this kind of conflicted feeling in and around Strasbourg that there's a lot of fans who want to enjoy the positivity of this latest development in the new ownership of Bluco and this exciting new generation of talent that they have on the pitch in front of them, but also their desire to not see the identity and the values of their club that have been upheld over the years through some very, very difficult and trying circumstances, I might add, when Strasbourg were really down in the doldrums in the sort of fourth tier of French football, and ultimately it's trying to find a way for those to coexist without that identity and without those values being completely eroded over time.
For the record, I do know that Berlin is in Germany, and Johnny, it's become like ask OTC where in Europe it is. From Johnny on email.
European football, pin the tail on the donkey, isn't it?
This question from Johnny on email. I've just been to the Olympiastadion in Berlin to watch Hertha. The ground is beautiful, but it was only about 60% full. Why do Hertha still play in such a large stadium when they can't fill it?
it's a historical problem because they've been in the Olympiastadion for a while. Of course, it's a huge historical asset, even if it was built in times that a lot of Germans would rather not remember. But I think there's an argument for it, being put to use rather than just being left to be overgrown. Now, Hertha have been working for a while on finding a more bespoke stadium solution. So somewhere smaller, more atmospheric, somewhere that's a bit more them, really. Because, of course, if you think of the atmosphere of German football, you think of the proximity of the fans to the pitch. The fans aren't just passive spectators. They're involved in the game. That they affect everything about German football. They affect the pace that it's played. All of it really is down to those supporters. And the fact that you have this massive running track. Ryan Hunn, our friend, told me a great story about when there were the tennis ball protests in German football, and people were throwing tennis balls on to complain about Monday night games, etc. Because the stands are so close so far from the pitch of the Olympiastadion, Hertha fans were using those sticks that people used to throw balls for their dogs in the park. They were using those to get the ball on the pitch because you couldn't do it with just your arm because it's so far away. So clearly this has been a problem for a while. Now, we know that Hertha have had ownership and funding issues in recent years. Now, that is one of the things, of course, that has held them up in terms of progressing this project. I mean, obviously, it's difficult to find the right spot of land in a city as big and densely populated as Berlin, anyway. But the fact that, of course, they were run as and I know JJ has pointed this out, they were run by 777 partners who have obviously been at least partially chased out of football now. That was a big issue. You had the presidency of Kay Bernstein that came to an end when he suddenly passed away as well. So there have been a lot of governance issues and ownership issues with Hertha that have really stopped them dealing with these very important infrastructure issues.
And is another issue perhaps the fairly recent rise of Union Berlin, maybe tempting people away for more of an authentic experience than Hertha can offer at the Olympiastadion? Is that something that's also maybe needs to be factored into consideration?
Well, it's definitely an issue, JJ, because the balance of Berlin football has swung all the way in the other direction. So you think before Hertha went down in 2023, Union won a ton of derbies in a row. Like Hertha could, not get anything on them. And you look at the fact that they've established themselves in the top flight. You look at the fact that they've got plans to expand their stadium as well, that they're moving forward with, and they've been moving forward with over the last year. All those things suggest that Union getting the upper hand in terms of the leading club in Berlin, it's not a short-term thing. I don't think it's going to change back super quickly.
On that note, thank you for all your questions on Ask OTC, by the way, and we welcome more week after week. It is the time, though, now when we turn our attentions to what should we watch this weekend. It's time for Game of the Week. Each week, we recommend a game for you to watch at the weekend. And just as importantly, we also suggest the food you should be having with it, of course. Andy, what are you going for this week?
Only one place to go. Sunday night, Napoli versus Juventus. It's just going to be fantastic. I can't wait for this. Now, of course, there are so many angles to this. Napoli and Juventus hate each other anyway. More on one side than the other, clearly.
Which side?
Napoli, because, of course, you think of Gonzalo Higuain, Gonzalo Higuain toilet seats and toilet paper, doing a roaring trade in Naples after that, and Maurizio Sarri. And of course, you have, on this occasion, Luciano Spalletti going back for the first time since he left Naples with his recently recovered steering wheel that the Ultras had stolen in the first place. So there's a lot going on here.
It's going to be goals, though, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't know. Not necessarily. I don't think that's a guarantee, but I do think tension is a guarantee. Napoli have been in the midst of a bit of an injury crisis, but it's forced Antonio Conte to make them a little bit more incisive, because David Neres, who has come back from some physical issues, has been back in the team, as JJ was saying in OTC yesterday. Scored that goal that saw them through the game against Roma, which was a huge win for them, by the way. It's also seen Noah Lang into the team, and he's added a bit of energy as well. And that and Rasmus Højlund really clicking, not just in terms of goals, but in terms of his all-round play. I think he's been really good for them so far. It's made Napoli competitive again. Now, if Juventus were to go there and win, and they're on a mini good run at the moment, that would get them right back in the title race. Remember, there's 1 point separating the top four at the moment. I don't know what more I've got to do to sell you this, apart from the food. I mean, it's Naples, right? So it's got to be reasonably priced, delicious pizza. I reckon if you start making your own sourdough, you might be able to bake it by Sunday. On the other hand, I mean, if you are, probably go for margarita. That's all the Neapolitans want. Anyway, I mean, there was this brilliant TV comedy sketch on Italian TV a few years back where they tried to present everyday Neapolitans with Hawaiian pizza, and they saw how people would react to pineapple on their pizza. Obviously, a lot of people were very unhappy about it. There was an old lady who received a pizza delivery with pineapple on it, and she hit the delivery man over the head with a box. So I think I would love a Diavola, but let's just keep it safe. Let's make sure everyone is just enjoying themselves and well fed, and go for a margarita.
Yeah, good call. And by the way, you can order them as well.
Yeah, that's also possible.
So that's Napoli versus Juventus. It's on Sunday at 7:45. What are you going for, JJ?
So I'm going to stay very close to home this time, being Paris-based. I think PSG versus Rennes has the making of an excellent Ligue 1 game this Saturday. It's PSG's opportunity to get back to form after having suffered a blip over the last weekend, losing away at Monaco, up against a resurgent Rennes side who have really managed to turn a corner unexpectedly under Habib Bey. They've really roared back after a difficult start to the season and are one of the most informed teams in France right now. So I think this game at Parc des Princes certainly has the potential to trip PSG up. And I think Rennes, they're a club that PSG historically have struggled against. They became something of a bogey side, certainly in the early years of Qatari ownership. A lot to like about Rennes. The best academy, bar none, in France at this moment in time. Better even than PSG's. Obviously, when PSG are out on the pitch, although both might not be fit enough to play, you do have Ousmane Dembélé and Désiré Doué, the current Ballon d'Or holder, the current Golden Boy, advertising just how good Rennes' youth setup is. And I think there's no better fixture to set you up in terms of what you're going to be eating and drinking before the game. You could help yourself to some oysters from Brittany, wash it down with a nice white wine, and then I think I'd probably follow it up with something like a tartare de boeuf and a glass of red wine. So I think this game has absolutely everything you'll need.
So you could have gone for Calvados, although that's Normandy, isn't it?
Yeah, so Calvados very much a Normandy-based product. There's also Pommer, which is also from Normandy, but is a lighter equivalent of that. But no, what I would fire back with would be cider, because that's the traditional drink in Brittany. So I'd have I would go for the dry one. I'm not too much of a fan of the sweet one. So yeah, a nice glass of dry cider to finish off.
PSG versus Rennes, that's Saturday at 8:05. So you could, see bits of both at the same time.